Hi, I'm Jennifer Potter, Executive Director of Be Well Texas. Too many people are struggling alone these days, and alcohol and drug deaths are increasing. We started Be Well Texas to offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere, even at home. We provide compassionate, caring support virtually or in person. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment if you don't have insurance. Really. Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here.
Hello and welcome into the Republic of Football podcast. I'm your host, Carter Yates, and joining me from beautiful Austin, Texas is DCTF senior writer Mike Craven, done with all but one of his college summer magazine tours. How's it been, Craven? How's the 2025 edition been of the tour?
It's been a lot of fun. Hit up some of my favorite places to eat around those campuses, which is one of my favorite parts of the trip. Talking to a lot of coaches, a lot of coordinators, a couple new faces, getting to know across the state. So that's been pretty cool. And with the transfer portal, we know less and less about these teams every single spring. And so you can do as much research and kind of look at the portal rankings and stuff until you're talking to the coaches and just kind of see who's sticking out, who's not. You just have no idea how these rosters are going to be. So it's been very enlightening and definitely helpful for when we start writing these magazine capsules.
What college campus has the best food? Maybe let's go most underrated food and then best food.
Yeah, most underrated food's probably Lubbock. I think Texas Tech has a better culinary scene than given credit for. I'm not saying it's as good as Houston or Austin or Fort Worth overall. But I do think it's very, very underrated. I think Waco can probably be in there for that same reason. Best food scene is probably Houston, just in general. I think that city is probably our best culinary city in the state. One of the best in the country, obviously. Houston has a 5-star restaurant in every cuisine you could go find, right? Like there's just the diversity in the cuisine, I think, sets Houston apart. My favorite is El Paso, though, because I am such a big Mexican food fan. El Paso, get to L&J's. That hard to beat. Absolutely hard to beat.
What is the type of food in Lubbock that's the best there? Like, are we going American? Is it the Mexican food? What is it?
It's a lot of like fried comfort food, right? Like there's a place called Dirk's that has really good like chicken fried steak, chicken fried, chicken, shrimp and grits are really good. They have a place called Jazz that's Cajun food that you wouldn't think Cajun food in Lubbock, but it's very good. Barbecue, they have a couple of really good barbecue spots up there. So again, didn't have the depth as some of those bigger cities, but I don't think people think you'll find good food in Lubbock, and you absolutely can find good food in Lubbock.
So let's start off with the best food city, Houston. You were in town to watch the Houston Cougars go through spring football practice. Couple storylines here, 2 new coordinators, a new quarterback in Conner WEigman. I want to start there with Conner WEigman. Can he move again? Is he back to being the old Conner WEigman from high school? I saw Slade Nagel, the offensive coordinator, said, I was surprised by how well he could move.
Yeah, he said that, and I started to smirk, and he was like, why are you smiling? And, I was like, well, because this is a conversation we have a decent amount, right? Like, WEigman coming out of high school was considered a more dual threat quarterback, especially more dual threat than the 2 quarterbacks he was sharing that class with. And that's, Quinn Ewers and Cade Klubnik. He was the athletic one of that, has a baseball background, could have gone and been in the major leagues, or at least in the minor leagues in baseball. Really good infielder. So he's always had good feet. I just don't think he was able to use it early on at A&M. And then he had so many injuries. He kind of lost some of that at A&M. And so hearing Coach Nagel talk about his athleticism and just being able to move in the pocket, he's not Sion Chris, right? Like he's not their most athletic quarterback. But if he can slide around the pocket, buy some time, do a little bit of quarterback run game, I think that'll help out an offense that has a bunch of question marks around him.
What are some of those question marks around him? You said there's a bunch. What's the biggest question mark?
I mean, it's got to be the offensive line. And they feel like they did a good job of addressing those question marks. But anytime you're bringing in 5 new offensive linemen and 4 of them are probably going to start, like, how do you know until you get to the fall what's going to look like? Like, I think at a lot of the other positions, like, you can look at a wide receiver and be like, he's good, or a running back, be like, he's good. Even a linebacker, like, he's offensive line. Like, it's such a cohesive project. Right? Like, the left guard is only as good as the center, is only good as the right guard, only good, and then all the way down, like, it's a unit. And so how those guys play together, how you find the first 5, if injuries happen between now and then along that group. So I like what they did. You know, Matthew Wyckoff was originally an A&M recruit. Dalton Merriman, Texas Tech. They have guys who have been at big time programs. They got a Baylor offensive tackle to come in and compete at left tackle. They have Power 4 names. They have some guys that are big time project or big time recruits. Just how do they get established? How do they play together? What does that system look like? I think that's the biggest question mark for me.
What is the system difference from last year to this year?
I think it's going to be more balanced. I think they're going to run the ball more. I think sometimes last year they either got stuck throwing it too much when they needed to be balanced, or just giving up completely on the pass game and just becoming kind of a middle school offense at times. And you can blame the personnel, and I don't think the personnel was very good. And it's going to be a lot better this year. So, Slade Nagel's probably going to look better than Kevin Barbay did, just because they've gotten better. Conner WEigman, a legit real quarterback. We talked about the offensive line. Amari Thomas and Harvey Broussard come in to help at wide receiver. They really like that tight end, Luke McGarry, that came in. So I think you're going to see a more balanced offense, maybe a more pro-style offense with less RPO type stuff. But I think they're going to take some vertical shots. I think they're going to try to get deep on you. It's going to look like the Tulane offense a couple years ago, where it was pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock, go up top. And I think if they can get the running game going, they like the way that this offense can look in 2025.
Don't they have like 7 running backs right now they're able to use? I was so shocked about how deep the running back room looked when I read your insider notes.
Yeah, that sounds like their deepest position, maybe not even on offense, just overall as a football team. Dean Connors is a player I think we both really like. We watch a lot of Rice football, obviously, because of this job.
Oh, yeah.
Not only can he help you out of the backfield as a runner, he is an elite pass catcher. And so with an offense that's looking for targets, that's looking for easy completions, that's trying to get some yards after the catch and create some explosive plays, I think he can be a real weapon. Rashawn Sanford, Stacey Sneed, Jamarion Burnett, 2 of those guys are sophomores. And so they're young at that position. They're deep at that position. They like a true freshman that they signed also in the class. And so I do think that they're going to try to run the ball a lot more in Third Ward than they did last year, at least more effectively.
Now, last year's Houston team, it was like the defense is up here and the offense is off the screen right now. Dig a hole, bury it 6 feet under. Is it getting closer this year? Or is the offense better than the defense? Or is the defense still way better than the offense? Like, what can you tell so far?
I think the defense was probably ahead in spring, and they're still ongoing. Houston's one of the teams that started a little bit later because of the coordinators and stuff like that. So they wanted more time in the weight room and kind of getting some of that stuff set before they got to spring. So still ongoing, but I think the defense was clearly ahead of the offense. One, they bring back so much in the secondary. Having an AJ Halsey and a Jeremiah Wilson, that's going to give you a bump. And there's just more familiarity over there. Like, I don't think the scheme change from Austin Armstrong or, the new defensive coordinator, I don't think it's as big as maybe what they're doing offensively. I think defense hits the ground running a little bit easier because it's not as, playbook based, right? Like, you just kind of go out there and hunt the football in a lot of ways. And so I think the defense has been ahead. They like where they're at defensively, but I don't think this offense is going to be better. It's just a matter of how much better it is and how quickly into the season they kind of hit, just because there's probably going to be 9 starters that are transfers on the offensive side of the ball. So that's just a lot of new faces, new pieces that have to kind of get on the same page.
The defense, Austin Armstrong coming in, you said you described his scheme as kind of the Bill Belichick, Nick Saban type. Can you kind of explain that for me? Isn't he like more of a defensive backs coach? Is that what you're talking about? Or what does that look like?
Yeah, very secondary friendly system, a lot of nickel, some odd man front. That doesn't mean they're always going to be an odd man front. I think he's had years where they've been more of an even front, years where he's been more of an odd front. But I think Belichick, Saban, it all goes back to that Cleveland Brown staff, 40 years ago that kind of birthed this multiple defense, and a lot of teams run it now. There's not many teams that are just 4-2-5 or just 3-3-5. Like, you have to be multiple because the offense is multiple. And they're going to match personnel. They're going to get their best players on the field. And I think they're going to be fast and try to go be disruptive. Maybe some less stunting and defensive line games in this defense than in Shield Woods. Like, he can get pretty creative up front. I think this is going to be more of a straight up defense, and a little bit of bend but don't break. Go make some plays when they get onto your side of the field and try to get them behind the sticks. I don't think you and I are going to notice the difference, right? Like, I think the average fan won't notice a huge difference between the scheme that he's running and what Shield Wood's running. It's just more some behind the scenes stuff that the players have to pick up, and just little responsibilities in the defensive line and on the back end.
Well, it's good he's a secondary coach because he's dealing with probably the best secondary in Texas, I'd argue. I mean, maybe the Longhorns up there, but like, I was looking at that secondary you're talking about in the insider notes. I'm saying, who wouldn't trade for this secondary right here?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's better than Baylor's secondary. Maybe Texas Tech's transfers hit, like, Pollock and that safety they got from one of the Dakotas. Maybe those guys hit and they get better. But yeah, I mean, I think Houston's secondary was a strength last year. I think it's going to be a strength again this year. It's figuring out the front line. They lost a decent amount along the defensive line, and then they lost a lot at linebacker. And so just who those leaders are going to be in the front six, front seven, I think is important, but they really like the secondary. And to your point, I think it's a Big 12 championship contending secondary. It's just a matter if the rest of the defense can be that. And then, obviously the offense that we talked about.
I heard Armstrong say that the field side defensive end is like the most important position on the field for him. Like, it kind of shows, okay, if our team's good, it's because the field side defensive end's good. What does their defensive line look like? What's that defensive end room look like? Do they have a game changer there potentially?
Yeah, they think Brandon Mack can be that dude. He's made some real strides this offseason. I think he's picked up the defense according to Austin Armstrong and looks poised for a big year. LaTravion McCutcheon is probably the primary backup there, and they like both of those guys and what they can bring. On the interior of the defensive line, they went to the transfer to kind of help Xavier Stillman and Xavion Dibbs and some of those guys that are back. Joshua Donald's a good player. Khalil Lafau comes in from Washington State, and we talked about TCU. TCU really likes Washington State defensive line transfer that they got as well. So apparently the Cougars were pretty good on the front last year. So I don't know if they have a superstar. I don't know if they have anybody as good as Anthony Holmes was last year, but I do feel like they think that they're going to be a pretty good team. And a name I need to mention is probably Carlos Allen. He's a guy at defensive end. He's usually they give me an offensive player and a defensive player at each of these schools, and you can kind of tell who's emerging as a leader because of it, right? Like, they give you that player, they trust that player, not only on the field, but off the field. And Carlos Allen was the guy who I got, who was at Kennesaw, a very under-recruited kid who kind of fits in with what Willie Fritz wants. And that's just like out of the mud football players, right? Like, Willie Fritz played at Pittsburgh State and had a mohawk. The dude just likes nitty gritty football players. And Allen kind of seemed like one of those, dirty dog type defensive linemen that you want up there. And I think that's how Houston has to win. They're not going to be the prettiest team. They're not going to be the most athletic team. They're absolutely not going to be the most expensive team. But they need to be one of the toughest teams. They need to be one of the grittiest teams. And that's typically Willie Fritz's calling card.
How was Willie? How was it chopping it up with him?
I love him. I could talk. Willie Fritz, honestly, I think Willie is probably the guy I could talk to the most about football for the longest period of time, just because he's got great stories. And what I love about Fritz is, like, nothing is new when you've been in the sport for that long. So, like, things that you and I would talk about as like new or cutting edge, you start kind of mentioning it to him. You're like, what about that option offense at Rice? How do you think that's going to go? And he's like, oh, we were running that at Sam Houston 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, it's just everything's old becomes new again. Just really loves the game. I mean, he's just a football junkie. And so for a football nerd like me that just likes hearing all these stories and learning a bunch about the game, like, you can just sit there. He's like an oracle, right? Like, he's seen it all. He's done it all. He's a pretty dry, funny guy. Like, he's just he's an interesting cat to talk to. You get why he wins everywhere he goes and why in the coaching community people talk about Willie Fritz so highly.
how lost was his voice when you talked to him?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever found, right? Like you can't lose what's left forever. And I just think that's the other part of him. He just has a really raspy, like you built a coach in the lab, right? It's Willie Fritz. And he's coached everywhere at every single level. And for so long that he's seen, we're at a real crossroads in college athletics, obviously. Like, we don't have to get into those discussions. It's probably a podcast all on itself. But with what's the ruling that's coming out of California and the rev share and the transfer portal and NIL, this is a guy who's like been at Blinn Junior College and Sam Houston when they had nothing. And he's like lining the field himself, right? And now he's got all this help and it's like almost too much. Where he's like, I don't know, I've been the general manager my whole life. Like, well, I don't see why I need. And so he has a unique perspective, because you go on Tuesday. This is what I love about the job. On Tuesday, you talk to GJ Kinney. On Thursday, you're talking to Willie Fritz. Well, like those are two different people with two different views on college athletics. And neither one of them are more right or wrong than the other one. They're coming from different generations and different times and different schools. And so to be able to kind of compare and contrast where everybody is an interesting part. But I really love the conversations with Coach Fritz. He's great.
On the player front, this doesn't have to be just Houston. Like, who's the best player interview you've had this magazine circuit?
It's a tremendous question.
It's a tough question on the spot. I was just thinking of it though.
Yeah.
We should do like an all magazine team. Like after the magazine stops, like best coach interview, best player interview.
Isaiah Nakwobia at SMU was a really good one. Josh Hoover at TCU was great. I always enjoy talking to Baron Morton. I think he's a pretty like straight front, honest guy. So those would be three of the ones that really stood out to me just off the top of my head. Like those guys, Lincoln Perry at Texas State was a really good interview as well this last week.
Do we want to get into Texas State right now? That's a good segue.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump into Texas State.
Who is playing quarterback? Because they've got 5 or 6 in there, and Kenny's like, one of you's going to figure it out and be the guy and be the alpha dog, and the rest of you might transfer before the fall happens.
Yeah, I mean, I still think they're trying to figure that out. I don't think that they're going to come to a conclusion right away. I think we're going to know who the first 2 guys are because they don't expect all 4 of those players to be there by the end of the transfer portal. And I like the way GJ Kinney's doing it. I think this is the fun conversation, right? Is like in modern college football, is it best to just populate your room with 3, 4, 5 really good offensive line or really good quarterbacks and just see who wins the job and let the transfer portal take care of the rest, right? And I think that's kind of what he's doing. I think GJ with his NFL background is comfortable doing that. I would pick Brad Jackson as the starter, and then the Auburn transfer Holden Garner to be kind of the backup. That was my feeling just from talking to Coach Kinney. He didn't say that. That's just me kind of reading between the tea leaves. I think those are the 2 guys that are most likely to win the job. And if I had to pick right now, it would be Brad Jackson, just because he can run the football. And I think Texas State's going to need that this year. I think they're going to need a quarterback who can add a dimension with his legs and take some pressure off the passing game because they don't have the weapons around the quarterback that they've had the last 2 years with Joey Hobart being gone and Cole Wilson being gone and just down the line.
Is it a crazy drop off on that wide receiver room, you think, from what they had last year to what they're going to have this year?
I just think it's the depth, right? Like, not only do you lose a Joey Hobart, and so you probably don't have that like wide receiver 1, but they really like Chris Don Jr. and Bo Sparks. They think those are really 2 really good wide receivers. Just last year and the year before, they'd say Joey Hobart, they'd say Ashton Hawkins, they'd say Cole Wilson. Like you would go down the line.
Yeah.
And it would just keep going. Like, it almost like and this year, there was 2 names and then it was kind of like, we'll see what happens after that. And I do think the transfer portal, this spring window that's opening up, it's Wednesday, Jesus Christ, Wednesday opening up officially. I wouldn't be surprised if Texas State added a player or 2 that maybe didn't win a job at the Power 4 level or just wants more playing time, more catches, wants to come closer to home. Like, I don't think they're done at the wide receiver position beyond Don and Sparks. They need more players. They like the young guys, but I just don't know if they want to count on them as much in year 1.
So I'm reading the insider notes, guys, up right now on TexasFootball.com. Texas State, the offensive line, it's one of the biggest question marks on the team. part of this, I feel like a lot of group of 5 programs, the trenches are just a question mark everywhere. At what point does that transition into this is normal for G5 to like, this is actually a big question mark? They need to figure this out right now.
I do think it's probably both. I think it's normal for the G5 to have this type of revolving door. But I also think it's concerning because of the talent that walked out of it. Like Nash Jones is a really good football player, probably going to play in the NFL. Like even if he doesn't get drafted, he's going to be invited somewhere. He's going to be on a practice squad. Like he's got a chance. Alex Harkey's at Oregon. He's going to be the starting left tackle at Oregon, right? Like those are 2 guys that you're not going to replace in the portal. Like Texas State can't afford those guys. You're not going to get that level of talent again. Maybe on accident, right before they're discovered. But on paper, April 14th, when we're having this podcast, like just nobody's going to be as good as those guys. So you're going to take a little bit of a step back. Like it's just natural. I think the same on the defensive line with what they lost. Like, sure, you can have some good players and you're not going to like throw in the towel and not try to go win football games. But I think you and I on this podcast can agree, like they're going to be worse in the trenches than they were last year on both sides of the football. And it's going to be up to the scheme. It's going to be up to the other players to kind of make up for that. But also, everyone else is in the same boat that they're playing against. Like nobody else is keeping their players either. Like Liberty's got a lot of money. They just lost their edge. Their true freshman or redshirt freshman edge from last year, who was awesome. They lost him today. Right. So like, you're just not going to keep those guys around anymore. I think that's just a fact of life. And you just go about trying to replace them as much as possible. And that's why these things has become kind of 1-year conversations at the G5 level.
Texas State benefited so much from the COVID year when they were at Incarnate Word, that staff, GJ Kinney, Mac Leftwich, because they got so many offensive linemen like a Nash Jones, and there was other guys I'm not mentioning right now that probably should have been at least G5, maybe could have snuck up P4, that ended up going FCS because just COVID recruiting and eligibility and people couldn't travel as much. But now we're finally starting to get out of the COVID eligibility guys and the guys who were affected by COVID-19. So that kind of stinks for Texas State on that side.
And rosters unloaded a lot of dead weight. Like it had stacked up because of that COVID year. And so places like Virginia Tech and Cal, some of those kind of mid-tier P4 teams, they had their guys that have been on campus for a while. They've played a lot. Well, now all of those guys are graduating out and leaving, and that leaves 15, 20 spots that weren't available the last couple of years. And where are they going to go find those players? They're going to go find those players at the G5, and that's going to be at Texas State and at North Texas and at UTSA. And so I think one of the reasons, this is just my conspiracy theory, I think one of the reasons that this staff was so quiet on who the offensive linemen and defensive linemen that were standing out is they don't want to lose them in the next month, right? They don't want a coach reading a piece online or getting an idea of what, and then like all of a sudden they've lost their starting guard. And so, the names that we knew, like Dorian Strong, Lockett, those guys are back on the offensive line, Khalil Alexander along the defensive line. Beyond that, it's a pretty big question mark of who's going to be there, who's going to be starting. I think those things are going to get figured out in the summer once the dust settles with the portal.
That's what no one talks about with the transfer portal, is how much more difficult it is for us to do the FBS team previews on this magazine, because you go there and the coaches don't know that, it's not going to come out during the portal. So they're like, I don't want to tell you any of the good guys we have, especially on the G5 level, because they could get scooped.
Yeah, I had a bunch of coaches be like, can you just come back in 3 weeks? We can give you everything you need. And I was like, I wish. We just, the timing of it, we just can't do it that way. And so, you just kind of explain that to the coaches, right? Like, hey, this isn't coming out till July. If there's a player you're talking to me about that you don't want an insider piece or whatever, just let me know and we can leave that kind of stuff out. So you just got to work with them. And then you just check back in May after we've written it all, and you can make small little tweaks of like, hey, is this still guy around? Or is that portal guy you just brought in last week, should I mention him? And so the job is a lot harder and harder for the coaches, but definitely a lot harder and harder for us too to make this magazine.
Yeah, so speaking of coaches not naming guys, Dexter McCoyle on the defensive coordinator side, I know you even wrote it in here, like the staff's hesitant to point out specific players. And look, this is not like a bash coaches for not giving us names. Like, I wouldn't tell you who my best guys are on defensive line, right? Like, I mean, what were you able to find out, though, about this defense?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely didn't want to highlight, because I think some of that is like a lot of these guys are still new as well. Like not only did they lose a bunch, they added a bunch. And so in 2 or 3 weeks, how much do you know or not know about this team? Like you're going to need some bullets to start flying over the summer and into fall to know more and more. Texas State's one of those teams that didn't even use all 15 of their spring practice games. There wasn't a spring game. They've really dialed it down and kind of gone NFL OTA style in practice too. And so, I don't think they're just knocking heads. I don't think they're trying to even come up with a depth chart. I think right now they're just trying to figure out who the 20 or 30 bodies are that can really count on and what kind of defense they can be. Are they a pass rushing defense? Are they a run stopping defense? Are they okay in the secondary? What are the holes? Who are the guys we might lose? I think a lot of times for these programs in March and April, it's as much of an evaluation process of themselves as it is a thing to like establish a depth chart for the fall. So I just think in terms of our purposes, that's just not where Dexter McCoyle is with his defense right now because it was such a revolving door. Last year they knew a lot more of the faces. Like, Ben Bell was back. Like there was just a lot more of like those where he was going to play. And they just lost a lot of those guys. Like I put it into this, Terry Webb's at SMU, Ben Bell's at Virginia Tech, Dominic Ratcliffe's at Indiana, and Tavion Coleman's at Colorado. That's just on the defensive line.
Brutal,
so I just, I don't blame the coaches at all. Cause like, how do you know? How do you know through 3 weeks of practice? And so, I think it's one of those things they'll know by September.
Yeah, I was doing the ACC preview for the magazine, and you got to do the 5 Texas ties. So I was like command effing on ACC rosters, like, all right, who's like a good Texas person thrown here? And Ben Bell popped up on Virginia Tech. I was like, oh my god, like I didn't realize he was in the ACC now. Like we've been talking so much about that guy not playing football. We'll be excited to see him actually play football this year. I did see Kev Ciardello. Sorry, I'm totally my bad, Kev. He did post something about a spring game. Said the defense was clearly running away with it, so much so that the scoreboard has been completely turned off. I feel like that is also just defense usually wins spring games like that, but I thought that was interesting because you said they were doing more OTA. Do you think they had a spring game still, though?
I mean, not really. I think it was a practice with some live good on good for a little while. That's what a lot of them are doing. I was at Rice on Saturday. That's what they did. To where it's not like what I grew up going to a spring game, what I would consider a spring game, but there's still, a scrimmage. There's still one-on-ones. There's still, 11 on 11, good on good. So I think they did some of that. But I think that probably goes back to the defensive line, the front seven being much more ahead than the offensive line is. And you see this in the NFL preseason as well, right? Like once you get past the starters, a lot of times the defense starts dominating those preseason games. It's because your twos along the defensive line are much better than your twos along the offensive line because there's just more better defensive linemen. That's really true at the college level too. So as you start testing depth, defense tends to start dominating because there's just not many 6'4", 300-pound tackles that you can roll out there.
Anything else on Texas State?
No, I mean, I do think that it's interesting, and this is true for North Texas. Like it's true for a lot of places. It's interesting to me in the new world that year one isn't the complete rebuild start over. A lot of times year one is a pretty known year from a roster standpoint. The guys on the roster, and then the coach is bringing in a lot of his guys. And so, those guys are going to play a lot. Like look at Sam Houston transferring to North Texas, right? Like when you're previewing Skylar Cassidy's defense, what 5 or 6 of those starters are going to be because there's so much familiarity. It feels like year two, sometimes even year three, is when the real roster kind of reset happens. And it's some of that recruiting behind the scenes that you haven't paid attention to the last couple of years. They've recruited more at the high school level. And so they haven't had to go to the portal as much as they did in like year one, where Kenny added like 50 dudes when he first walked in that building. And so I think on the outside, there's a lot of question marks because we don't know a lot of these young guys that haven't played the first couple of years he's been there. But the staff feels like a lot of those players who signed that's been there for an offseason or even 2 off seasons going into year 3, that they're going to be better than maybe we expect from the outside because there's just some organic growth that's been going on that we're gonna see this year. I think that's true at a lot of places I went, where there's just kind of like this new crop of players now. And I think it goes back to the COVID year, and we were talking about that backfield finally starting to kind of even itself out or loosen itself out.
I think that's true at a lot of schools, but I will say I'm going to go to Sam Houston tomorrow, and it's not the case there because for sure to feel longer, I don't know what's happening on the defensive side right now. It being like 16 starters. 16 of the top tacklers are gone. So similar for a lot of schools out there, but there are still some schools that are like, oh man, I totally unknown.
And that was on, I mean, I don't even know if it's on Sam Houston, quote unquote. Actually, I think it kind of is. Like, I think they knew they wanted Phil Longo, at least at the top, they wanted Phil Longo for weeks, and they drug their feet on it, and they didn't hire quick enough. And every single day the transfer portal is open and you don't have a head coach, you get worse. And so you need to go out there and hire early and get ahead of it. And I know this was a unique situation. They didn't fire their coach, but as soon as Keeler was leaving to Temple and you knew that, and you knew that you liked Phil Longo and that's where the brass wanted to go, I mean, it wasn't like you had to negotiate. Go hire Phil Longo and let him get into the portal and save his football team. And they didn't do that. And it's probably going to hurt him in year one.
Yeah, two things can be true. You're 135th in the nation in returning production on defense. Also, probably should have made that hire sooner and gotten on the ground running. I know one thing that you can do pretty soon here is go to homefieldapparel.com, pick up a college t-shirt for summer season. It's starting to get 84 degrees today. It's like nice and getting a little hot out there. I can taste summer coming. You're going to need to be loaded up with all the college shirts from homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code DCTF to get 10% off your first purchase at Homefield Apparel, guys. Homefield Apparel, promo code DCTF, 10% off your first purchase. One more time, that's Homefield Apparel, 10% off your first purchase, promo code DCTF. All right.
Are you a summer or winter guy? Like if you have, I mean, I'm sure we're both spring, fall, like spring, fall is better than summer or winter, but if it has to be really hot or really cold, which one's your preference?
Really hot.
Yeah,
I've always grown up in Texas and I'm a summer guy. August heat. I don't do very well in the January, December type cold fronts.
Yeah, my blood is too thin. Every July and August, I want to be a winter guy. And then winter comes around and I'm like, oh, I'm not built for this.
I like to complain about it a lot. And then like, oh, it's so hot. Like this is so brutal. Like global warming sucks. And then the winter will come for 2 days. And I'm like, I'm over it. I bring it back. Bring back the heat.
100%. Yeah, as well. Right there with you.
Speaking of where it's pretty hot, it's out in El Paso. I was doing the UTEP summer magazine visit last week. Craven, what do you want to know about them? What was your biggest question about UTEP going into year two?
I guess if Malachi Nelson's going to be the starting quarterback.
That wasn't a question for me until you brought it up on the show. You're like, I think Skylar Locklear thinks he can beat this guy out. And I kind of said, yeah, okay, sure. Like Skylar Locklear was a good quarterback last year. It's really hard to judge a lot of guys based on their offensive line and just overall lack of production. But talking to Scotty Walden, he's very, and again, this could be smokescreen, not wanting either guy to leave into the portal, which I totally understand. He's like, Skylar Locklear's had the best spring he's seen in 4 years. He lifts with the offensive lineman, squatting 500 plus. Like, Scotty Walden did not bring up Malachi Nelson organically in the conversation. And I didn't really ask him just many one-on-one Malachi Nelson questions because I probably knew he wasn't going to answer them very much. But still notable that he didn't just bring up Malachi and gush about how awesome he is. That doesn't mean – I still think Malachi will start. Like, if you're Scotty Walden, you get the guy who's the former 5-star. I feel like you got to throw him out there, but he was talking very nice about Skylar Locklear.
I do think the portal plays a part. You want to keep both of those guys. And, I think even if Malachi Nelson is your guy, I think you're assuming he has a big year than Bolts. Right. And Locklear is only a junior. And so he could theoretically be back in 2026 to be your starter if he got passed over this year. And then also I think, just like with UTEP's offensive line problems, just the nature of college football, you're probably going to start two guys, right? Like I don't think Skylar Nelson makes it through, or Skylar Locklear makes it through a whole season as a starter either, if he was named week 1 starter, right? Like you're going to need both of those dudes, maybe even more. And I thought it was interesting just from following around, like, Adrian Brodus on Twitter, just, following up on the UTEP spring game. Malachi Nelson wasn't one of the first 2 quarterbacks to play. And I know that doesn't always indicate anything, but he wasn't in there on the first 2 drives, right? That was those other guys, including Locklear. And so I'm just very fascinated. I mean, anytime you hear a 5-star quarterback going to UTEP, and to be clear, it's the only time you've ever heard 5-star quarterback going.
Not
to
every
UTEP.
time. The one time you hear
right,
it.
the one time you hear it. I think all of us just make the assumption, well, he's the starter. Like, what else is the team going to look like? the longer and longer I've talked to folks around the program, like the less and less I'm sure that that's a slam dunk. And it's just going to be something interesting to go in. We're going to hear a lot of national podcasts just assume Malachi Nelson is the guy at UTEP. I'm just not sure that's the case.
It is transitioned from, remember when Lincoln Riley used to they'd bring in Kyler Murray and they'd bring in Jalen Hurts, and he would say deep into summer, like before fall camp, like, well, Kyler Murray's still got to win the job. Like, we don't have a starter yet. I understand coaches do that. This is almost transitioned to I actually really believe Malachi Nelson is not a surefire starter here. Like, there is not that much buzz. He's not one of the first two quarterbacks out. I don't know, man. They do have 4 quarterbacks who played last year and then dropped Malachi Nelson in. And I know Scotty Walden had been like, this quarterback room is the most competitive room I've ever had. That needs to translate to the rest of the team. In late March, he did get on the room and was like, they aren't being competitive enough. They are waiting for someone to be named the starter before they start being a leader, and you can't do that. Scotty Walden's a former quarterback. He's very hard on his quarterbacks. He said he thinks they have responded to that, but I think it's a total question mark. And right now, I'm probably still going to put Malachi Nelson as the starting quarterback on the Summer Magazine, but it could be a coin flip.
Yeah, I think I would still put my money on Malachi Nelson, but less of it than I would have when he first signed. And so we'll see how that goes. My other big question, Walden's just known as this offensive guy is supposed to bring all these points to the table. Do you think this offense improves this year? And if so, why?
The offense would improve because they're a lot stronger. Remember when you went to UTEP last summer and you came back, you're like, that's the smallest football team G5 level I've seen. He told me their squat max as a program was 365 average, which he was like, that's atrocious. He was like, Texas high school football programs have better than that. He said they're up to 470 now.
I could squat like 285 and I'm 40 and broken. So it's not great.
So they have upped those numbers big time. He talked about the Summer Magazine visits are always great for the offseason grind set they've been doing. So they went to an old dingy back room at the Glory Road gym where Texas Western went to the NCAA championship in 1966. They were doing mat drills and stuff like that. So I think they've gotten a lot stronger. Brennan Smith is the center. He's the straw that stirs the drink. And then they've got 2 linemen who are injured right now, Azizi Henry and Ivan Escobar, but a bunch of other guys who got playing time last year. He basically said they were pushed around far too much. We saw that on both the offensive line and defensive line. I think they're better. I don't know by how much. Last year, their entire offense was screen pass because our quarterback can't hold the ball for 1.5 seconds because some dude's in his lap. So they got to be better than that, but I'm not saying they're going to be mauling people. They're not going to be like an old Dana Dimmel coach team. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I do like the skill position guys, though. If they can figure out a way to protect, and if they do get solidified at the quarterback position, I do feel like there's some weapons out there, mostly like Kenny Odom and some of those names we saw from last year.
Yeah, Kenny Odom is a dog. They describe him as the alpha in that room. And then Cam Thomas is the minor back, which is basically the wide receiver running back. He's only 5'7", but really electric player. And Mark Calla, he was offensive coordinator not offensive coordinator. Kendall Briles is the offensive coordinator. He worked for him at TCU, but has worked with Kendall Briles since 2017. And Kendall Briles is one of those guys on the forefront of the pace and space offense that Walden likes. So he's very familiar with the scheme. And Calla actually related what they did with Savion Williams last. Okay, don't roll your eyes at this when I compare Savion Williams to Cam Thomas. All right, because I know Savion Williams is 6'4" and Cam Thomas is 5'7". Guys, I get it, but the way they used them was similar because Savion Williams was a quarterback, running back, wildcat guy. They can use Cam Thomas like that. They're going to get their best athletes in space, is what I'm trying to say.
I was looking at the roster, and it's hilarious. UTEP has 7 quarterbacks and 4 running backs,
and 9 punters and kickers. That was a missed opportunity. I needed to ask Walden about the kickers because they legit have 9, and they're gonna have a full competition up until the season because the kicking was not great last year.
They got a soccer team in their specialty unit.
Yeah, I think I heard a story about them bringing 14 guys down. They walk down the ramp when they go into practice. You those videos.
Minor shaft.
Yeah, so it's like all the team comes down the minor shaft, and then like the 14 kickers come down after them.
And Buzz Fabiano's back.
Yes,
so
but not guaranteed a starting spot.
Right. Well, clearly.
Yeah. There's 13 other dudes with them.
At times last year, like UTEP's defense was really good, I thought. Not all season, but definitely like towards the end of that stretch. I mean, it's one of the reasons they ended with some wins in Conference USA. New defense coordinator, old guys at part of the Dallas Cowboys staff now. But we talked about this before on this podcast, like hired a guy to run the same exact system. What are your thoughts on the defense after talking to them?
They don't have the one guy like Maurice Westmoreland last year who scares you as a pass rusher. And also Kyron Duhan was a freshman all-conference guy who's at Oklahoma State. So that's life in G5 football. They have at the ends, so the bandits, kind of like the edge rush guy, is Jalen Jones, who's 6'5", Echo Taylor, 6'5". They've got other dudes who are 6'6", 6'7". You're starting to see them look like okay, you got for real rangy big football players. And they did name some guys who were like, they're not going to be out on the insider piece because transfer portal's coming up. They'll be in the summer magazine if, fingers crossed, they don't go anywhere. But I was a hater of the 3-5, honestly, last year and before the season, and I thought it wouldn't
North
work.
North Texas spoiled your brain on that one.
Yes, because I looked at UTEP and I said, you've got one 300-pound defensive lineman. You need way more of them to run a 3-3-5. If you're going to have less defensive linemen, they need to be bigger. But they were really good last year, honestly. Like, they kept them in a lot of games. They were first in the Conference USA in sacks and tackles for loss. I think Bobby Daly will come in and bring some new blitz packages and blitz schemes, so you're not going to see them taper off on rushing the quarterback. The big concern is they don't have that one alpha dog like Maurice Westmoreland. They do have KD Johnson, who, God bless Diego Pavia, the JUCO rule, he's back for a 6th year. And thank God he came back, because I don't know who else they have a defensive tackle other than KD Johnson. He's a great option, but the depth is a concern, as it is for most G5 programs.
Yeah. Every place I went needed a defensive tackle and an offensive tackle and a playmaker. Right. Like you just like everybody looks for that. And just, it's a colander, right? It gets sifted out the further and further you go. And there's just not much left once you get to the UTEP and Rices of the world in terms of like viable instant impact big dude. Because Houston's getting them to be their second or third defensive tackle for more than you can give them to be your starter.
I will give credit to UTEP, though. I know I said the defensive tackle room was bad depth. That is, like you mentioned, Craven, that's everywhere. Their depth is night and day better than it was in year one. And that's not just coach speak. I mean, Walden talks about the defensive personnel depth chart meeting he has. And he's just saying, like, man, this is different. Like, they have legit 6 linebackers that could start, and they've got their returners back from last year. I think the secondary room's solid. I know they did lose Amir Boyd Matthews to Texas Tech, so that hurts. But there's still Austin P guys there that have been in the program for a while. I'm thinking Xavier Smith. There's other guys there too that are still really good. So I would put, I know you didn't ask for this, but I would put my record prediction at I think bowl game is reasonable expectation for UTEP this year.
That would be huge. A bowl game would be big. I know for some listeners that probably doesn't sound like a big mark, but at UTEP, that doesn't get accomplished very much, like 3 or 4 times this century. And so that would be huge. And what I'm excited about UTEP for, obviously the quarterback situation is interesting, but they've recruited so well and they've added so many guys the last 2 years from the high school ranks. We may see some of those guys now, right? Like how are those guys developing? Do we start seeing some redshirt freshmen or some true sophomores really start to kind of pop out for them, not just the transfer guys that they brought in going into last year? So I always kind of love the turning of the page for these colleges where it's like, we're going to see some like new guys come. We're going to see if the recruiting rankings were right. And they've led Conference USA back-to-back years in recruiting. To see what that talent starts to look like will be a lot of fun this year.
Also, 42 of those guys are Texas high school football players, which is the most in FBS. So have found an ideology of we're going to build it through the high school ranks, which prior to Walden, it was very JUCO transfer heavy. And, you know, the excitement Walden has works at UTEP and El Paso. And sometimes in a world of college football where everyone is so apathetic and like, oh, the calendar's broken and our jobs have never been harder. And yes, that's true. I've said it before, college football coaches have a worse work-life balance than the president. Having a guy that's excited, to be at UTEP does wonders because it's a great town. It's a great city. I mean, it's not a town. Sun Bowl's awesome. It's a beautiful city. Like, you got an ambassador for that program now, and you're seeing it in the recruiting.
And if you're not excited, who's going to be? Right? You don't have to sell the University of Texas or Texas Tech or, even like a Houston that's in a backyard, SMU that are in backyards of huge hubs. To recruit and to recruit well at UTEP, first you need to get guys to come see you. And you get guys to come see you by being excited about the thing that they're going to come see. And I think a lot of times these coaches can be too cool for school when it comes to selling their programs. And, I give a lot of credit to Walden to just being, wide open with his enthusiasm, his excitement. We've talked about it a few times on this podcast. It's obviously authentic. And I think that's how you recruit, is just being authentic. I'm not saying, everybody needs to go become Scotty Walden because that wouldn't be authentic to themselves. But I do like that he just leans into it. He doesn't have any, embarrassment about it or reservations about just being who he is. And, I think that stuff can be contagious. With the 5-star and the 4-star guys, you're selling playing time, you're selling NFL, you're selling NIL. At UTEP, you're selling excitement. Like, these are a lot of underrated guys that don't have a lot of offers that want somebody to be excited about them. And Walden fills that gap. Like, he fills that void of like, hey, maybe your hometown school hasn't offered you. Maybe you don't have 6 FBS offers, but you're the most important person in El Paso today. Right. And like that goes somewhere with a 2-star, 3-star guy that probably feels a little overlooked and has the chip on their shoulder, like just like Scotty was. And I think it really works at a place like UTEP to where maybe it wouldn't be needed at Texas A&M or Oklahoma or something, but it absolutely is needed and valued at UTEP. And I think that's why they've signed such good classes.
Yeah. So the build is definitely happening. And I know this sounds like a stretch reach stat, but UTEP was as bad as the year kind of was last year. I mean, obviously it was a building block culture. Like, they finished very strong, but like there were times it was pretty bleak last year. Right. And as bleak as it got, they were 14 points away from a bowl game. They were tied or leading in the fourth quarter in 3 games that they lost by a combined 14 points. If they win those 3 games, they're in a bowl game. So the margin of error is very slim in G5 football.
Especially in Conference USA.
Especially in Conference USA. And I think this team is light years ahead of where last year's team was, which is why I'm putting it a bowl game, not bowl game or bust, but like I think I would put their record right now with like 6-6.
And that's all you could ask for in year 2 of a program like UTEP that can't just buy their way to competitiveness. Like, you just want year 2 to be more exciting and more promising than year 1. And hopefully that becomes true. And then you want year 3 to build on year 2. And then all of a sudden, by year 3, year 4, year 5, you're right there in Conference USA contention. And so if they can take another step forward, a large step, if they make a bowl game and close out some of those games, like, now all of a sudden that excitement has some bite to it. And it's not just selling hope, it's selling reality. And I think that's when you really get it going out there, because it's a unique place that has opportunity, has a chance. Like, UTEP has a chance, especially moving into the Mountain West after this year, where they're kind of like more in their footprint geographically.
Yeah.
I think that they can really start having a niche and really start having kind of an identity with Walden there. You just need to see it. You need to see the build, and then the city gets behind it and everything kind of starts falling from there. They just have never been able to sustain that build. Not since Mike Price was there early in the century. They'll just have a good year and then it goes back, right? Or they have an excitement and then it simmers away. If Walden can kind of capture that excitement and then just like keep it aflame, I think UTEP could be a real player in the Mountain West in a year or 2.
Did you see the thing too on how he's matching $70,000 in NIL donations for the team? I mean, you don't see too many coaches do that though. It is very smart, but like, you don't see a lot of guys do that. It just shows he is all in. I thought that was a cool move by him too.
Because we need to remember the rev share is a bigger conversation, probably one we could have a whole podcast on here in a week or two when spring ball kind of slows down. We want to talk about kind of the newness once it gets settled and we kind of know what the numbers are. But if you go around the state, which I have, right, like A&M, Texas, the Big 12 schools, SMU, they're going to be at $13 to $15 million on their payroll just from rev share, right? And that's before you get to NIL. Like they're still that's the conversation I want to have, right? I think people think the $13 to $15 million cap is going to be a hard cap and like everybody's playing in the same level of playing field. And I got news for you. LSU's payroll is going to look different than Vanderbilt's, right? It always has, it always will. It may be the return of the bag man or something, but like Ohio State's not just going to have a $13, $15 million payroll. But then you get down to like the American, and I think it's going to be on average about $2 to $3 million per team with like maybe a Memphis and Tulane, USF, kind of getting more to the 5 million. The Sun Belt's going to be about $1 million to $2 million, I think, for most schools. Conference USA is where it's fascinating, right? Like 500,000, 600,000, maybe
Dude,
up to $1 million.
It's all FCS schools who are transitioning to the FBS. Like that's what they've made bread their butter. They
just don't have the money.
Their bread.
They don't have the money, right? And so I just think Conference USA is still a place where you have to sell hope, you have to sell excitement, and you have to sell a little bit of a feeder system. And that, I wonder if the coaches, this isn't a Scotty Walden conversation. This is just a lower level G5 conversation. Do you think coaches have started to, this is something I need to ask them, honestly. You think coaches have started to lean into what they are and going like, hey, we're not recruiting you for 5 years. We're going to recruit you for 2 or 3 years. You're going to dominate here. And then you're going to go make $1 million somewhere. Right? Like, do you think it would be bad to lean into that as a program, or do you think that would undersell you and maybe undercut you as a program in recruiting? Because I tend to think, why not just go with it? Right? Like why not be the feeder program of like, hey, we're going to go get you paid if you come here.
How about not 2 to 3 years? How about 1 year? You ball out and then you go, dude. Kyron Duhan was like
wishful thinking on the 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, Kyron Duhan was a great player. He was honorable mention all conference and a freshman. And he's going power 4 like immediately.
Right.
So look,
I would sell that as a success story, not as a failure, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Like, we need to reframe that as recruiters of like, look at this. Like, this is what we're doing. And instead of like, oh no, this could happen if I go recruit good players.
I think that is a strategy more coaches should take of like, this is a 1 year. Remember when they used to do I'm not saying it's last chance you, like these guys are in trouble or whatever, but like, Last Chance U Netflix was you come to this school for 1 year and you go get your bag somewhere. Yep. Why don't more schools, now that JUCO isn't as big of a thing, it just becomes, here's where it gets, because people don't want to see themselves as JUCO, right?
Bing. It's a pride ego thing.
Yep. As I was talking it out, I was like, it's disrespectful to talk about them like a JUCO. But look, this ecosystem, like maybe that's kind of how it has got to be now.
Yeah. We talked about this with Dave Aranda. There's 2 types of people in this world, right? There's the one who look at it the way it should be and the ones that look at it the way that it is. And I think if you're looking at it the way that it should be, you want it to be organic, right? Come to UTEP, we'll develop you for a couple of years, then you'll start, then we'll go win a conference championship and you can come back here in 20 years and be the hero of UTEP. But like, that's not what it is. What it is we're going to sign 30 to 40 high school players that are as good as we can get. And if we lose 5 to 10 of them because they're awesome, like that's good. That's a good thing. Just like when somebody comes and hires Scotty Walden away from UTEP to go get a bigger job, that would mean he did well. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It sucks, but it's not a bad thing. Like it's proof of a healthy program. And I think new proof of a healthy program is like we were talking about with Texas State and I read the list of where their defensive linemen are now. I would use that in recruiting. I'd make that in graphics and in pamphlets and stuff. And I think we just it'll get there. I just don't think the coaches by and large have like grappled with that reality themselves because they don't want to see themselves as less than, right? Because we all don't.
Yep.
But if you go get a job at ESPN, that's good for Dave Campbell's. Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's okay to be a quote unquote feeder school if you lean into it and you use the advantages that it gives you. And, I agree with the people who think that there should be a buyout, just like in European soccer, where it's like, if you want my freshman defensive end, great, but you owe me $200,000 because I developed them and I recruited them and all that kind of stuff. I think that would balance it out a little bit. But until then, I think as these programs, as counterintuitive as it may be, I think it'd be good to lean more into that nature of it, and just be real with the recruits and just say, hey, y'all want to play at the Power 4 level? You don't have those offers right now. You come here, you prove that, you win some ball games out in El Paso, and you absolutely will go get your $100,000 at Oklahoma State or wherever. Proof's in the pudding. Here's these 5 guys that just did it. I think we're headed towards that way. I think the schools that get in front of that are going to have a little bit of an advantage, honestly.
I totally agree with that. I think, and this is opening another can of worms here, and we don't have to go all into it, but like, I think that'd be easier for schools to sell once they get to a one transfer portal window. Because right now, you don't want the message to be like, hey, look, you come here, you ball out for 12 spring practices against our practice defense, and you can go Power 4. It's like, we don't want that.
Right. Carter Yates will put you in an insider piece, and then you'll be at Texas Tech tomorrow, right? You definitely don't want that. I do think, right, because predicting what's going to happen with college football right now is an insane prospect. But I do think we're trending towards one portal, and it just being the winter portal.
That'd be awesome. I'd love that. Now, again, big think on that.
Right. Who knows?
Never that easy.
Yeah. Who knows? It might get sued into oblivion. Who knows what happens?
Well, that's going to do it for the podcast today. This is 3 insider scoops from 3 different schools. We'll have a couple more of these guys next week and the week after as we wrap up these insider trips. Craven, any closing thoughts before we head out?
No, we're entering the real off season. We've had spring football and been able to do these insider pieces, so that's been cool. If you're listening to this podcast and you're still here on the 56th minute of it, send us some questions, send us some thoughts of what y'all want us to talk about in May and June and July as we kind of go through the off season. Maybe we can come up with some like bigger topic stuff where we just spend 30, 45 minutes on like general managers, rev share. Just anything that you have thoughts on, we can always kind of ask some coaches around and then bring it to the podcast. We just need to know what y'all want to listen to, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, always looking for advice on what we should talk about on this show. For Dave Campbell, senior writer Mike Craven, I am Carter Yates signing off for the Republic of Football podcast. Thank you for listening, and podcast over.